So welcome everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is the day 2 of the Forge training, and on this track we'll be covering the .NET Core code. My name is Augusto Goncalves, I'm a Forge advocate here at Autodesk. I also have here with me Joao Martins from the same team. He'll be helping with Q&A. And also taking the chance, if you have any questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom, of your Zoom screen. And let's get started. So what are we doing this week? We have a 4 days training with 4 tutorials from the learnforge.autodesk.io tutorial. That's what we are following. We have 2 parallel tracks in Node and .NET Core. This is the .NET Core. There is another one for Node.js as well. We have 4 sessions during the day, so 8 a.m. Pacific time right now, then again 10 a.m. midday, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. So 4 sessions that we are going to show you how it works, how you can do that piece of the tutorial, give you some time, and then come back later to answer questions and go to the next step. During each session, we are going to code that piece of the tutorial and show you how to do it, what are the important pieces that you have to pay special attention. And in between sessions, you can do the coding and do your own version of the tutorial. And when we are back, you can always review, ask questions, and we can help you make sure everything is working. So don't be shy, ask your questions on the Q&A. We are here for that. Yesterday was the first day of this training. We covered the upload, translate, and view modules. The recordings of yesterday, today, and the rest of the days will be available right after we finish this week. We are going to send you the recordings via email, so don't worry, you'll get all of the recordings as soon as we are done here. No, later this week. So today is the Access Your Modules on BIM 360 or Autodesk Construction Cloud and Fusion team. So let's start with day 2. So that's what we are here for today. The purpose of today's training is to create an application where you can sign in with your Autodesk credentials, just like you see on the screen. And on the left side, you'll be able to see all your hubs, which each hub is a BIM 360 account, Autodesk Construction Cloud hub, or Fusion hub, or your personal hub on the A360. So you see all of those hubs on the left side. Those hubs are connected to your personal account. So that's why you as a user needs to sign in and provide your credentials. We can then expand to the projects, to the files, and to a specific version of the file. And we are able to see that file on the viewer on the center of the screen. So that's the purpose of today's training. As I mentioned, this is the 8 a.m. session, introduction and setup. We have another session at 10 a.m., 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. So let's start with session 1. So this is really about getting your environment ready to work with the APIs. The first thing you have to do is to create a Forge account or your Autodesk account with Forge entitlement. Then we need to create a Forge application. Later we need access to one BIM 360, Fusion or A360 account. When you go to a360.autodesk.com, that's the easiest way because you can start a trial right away and that will work for today's training. If you want to connect to BIM 360, you have to pay special attention that you need to be an account admin to authorize the application to access the account. But I'm going to show you all of that, so don't worry. But you need those 3 things. You need the Forge account, you need the client ID, which is your Forge app, and you need at least one hub to make the sample work. And if you need BIM 360, that hub needs to be, if you need a hub to be BIM 360, then you need to provision that to give access to it, and we're going to discuss that. All right, so what about the development tools? We need Visual Studio 2019 at least, with ASP.NET workload and .NET Desktop workload. So those are the two we need here. Actually, the second .NET desktop development is for Friday training. So if you're doing the whole week, it's better to install Visual Studio with that workload, so that will work for you as well. Oops. So let's see what we need to do here. Let demo time. So let me come back here. Let me close this for a moment. Yeah, that's where we are gonna go. So first things to go is to forge.autodesk.com. If this is your first time coming to this web page, you have to sign in right here on the top right. Let's click on sign in. And you are going to type your credentials. If you don't have a Forge or Autodesk account, click on create account and follow the steps to create your Autodesk account. Then click next and type in your password. And hopefully now we see all the apps we have. If this is your first time, this page will be empty. You don't have any apps yet. If you did yesterday's training or you have an account already, you probably have one or more of those cards here. So this is my card from yesterday when I was doing the training yesterday with you. But for today, I can reuse the same or create a new one. Let's say I'm going to reuse the same. It's important to notice that I have my client ID, I have my client secret, and today is extremely important that this callback URL is exactly the same as in here, right? So if I don't have yesterday training and I just want to create a new one, let's do it here as well. Leave all the options selected. For today, what we really need is the data management API. That's the one that will be important. And there is no additional cost selecting all of the APIs. So just leave all of them selected and that should work for you. So Forge training, day 2, training. And now is the callback URL. As I said, we are following the Learn Forge tutorial. And the step that we are covering at this time is the before you start coding. Before you start coding here. So we are creating the account, we are creating the app, and here is the callback URL that we need. Let me copy this and come back here and paste. So it needs to be exactly the same, otherwise it will not work. So let's create the app. So now I should have my app. You see all of the APIs selected here, and you see the client ID and the client secret. The client ID, you can share that with others because sometimes we need to share that to complete some integrations. But the client secret, it's only for you. You should not be sharing that one. What else we need? We need to go to our to A360 and create an account. Or we need BIM 360. So if you have BIM 360, you can skip this and go to BIM 360. If you don't have anything, if you don't have BIM 360 or A360, you have to create one here. You can try now if you don't have anything, or sign in if you already have one. So let me sign in so I can see my data, just to confirm that I actually have data here. So once you sign in, you should see a project, 2 projects at least, or something like that. And if you click on your name on the top right, you should see your hubs. So as you can see here, I have 2 hubs on this account, right? One thing to notice is that this demo project that comes by default with A360, it does have a few files, but those files are actually just empty files for demo purposes. So for today, they may not work as expected, right? So it's important to upload a new file here. And even more important, after you upload the file, click on it to view here on Fusion. Because Fusion, let me remove this here because, sorry, just remove these notifications. So you have to click on the file to view the file, and that will trigger the translation for that file. So Fusion or A360 will not translate the files until you view that for the first time. Now, if you have BIM 360, that's a bit different. So go to your BIM 360 account and click on the document management. You should see the account admin here. And if you don't have the account admin, it means that you cannot change settings for your account. But if you have the account admin, go to settings, go to custom integrations, and if you already have integrations, you should see something like this. If you don't have anything, it should be empty, but doesn't really matter. We are going to click on add custom integration. And here we are going to select what we want. In this case, we only need the second, but you can leave the two selected for now and click on next. And as I'm the developer and I have access to the client ID, I'm just click here on I'm a developer and click next. And here I have the hub ID, which is important, but let's say I just telling the system that I have copied that information. And here's the important one. I need the client ID. So let me go back to my app. So that's my app for day 2. Let me copy this and come back here and say, okay, now this BIM 360 account or Construction Cloud account is my client ID, my app is allowed to access this Construction Cloud. So for training day 2. You can do a description, you can do an image as well, but that's the minimum that we need. And let's hit save. Okay, now it's connected. It means that that client ID can connect to this BIM 360 Construction Cloud account. Okay, so that's the before we start coding. What else do we need? We need the tools. We need Visual Studio 2019. So let's, as we're using .NET Core, let's click here, and we have to install it and make sure we have those two packages enabled. So you go to visualstudio.microsoft.com, and we have Visual Studio, Visual Code, and Visual Studio for Mac. In this case, as you're probably running Windows, that will be Visual Studio. Visual Code can work, but it's not great. So I would actually recommend you to use Visual Studio. And you can select the Community Edition right here, 2019. So download and install. After you are done installing, you should see an icon like this at the bottom. Let me click on it. It will launch. And you should see a list of your recent projects if you have any, or empty, and something like this with all the getting started options. But we are going to continue without code for now. So you should have your Visual Studio running like this here. Okay, so that's what we need to do on this first step. The one that it will take you some time is to install Visual Studio. So start now. Make sure to have your BIM 360 or A360 account ready, one of the two at least, or the two can also work. Let me close this and let's go back to the tutorial and your client ID. So let me go back to the presentation. So this is your turn. Now it's your time to create your Autodesk Forge account, create your application, access BIM 360 or Fusion or A360. And if you're using BIM 360, to provision and add that to the custom integrations tab, and have Visual Studio running on your machine. So that's what we need for today's training. So there is a question from Elias asking if Visual Studio 2015 will work. Well, it does work, but the problem is Visual 2015, I believe it doesn't support .NET Core. So that's what we're using today. So I would suggest you to use 2019, and if you follow the tutorial, all the screens and images are showing 2019, right? So you may have some trouble with 2015, and I'm pretty sure that 2015 does not support. But let's take a look here. I believe this is documented. 2019. There is also a 17 right here. And yeah, I don't believe the 15 will. Oh, yeah. You see, .NET Core is not supported on 2015, and .NET Core 3.0 is not supported on 17. So we are using 3.0, which is not the latest, but it's one of the latest. And yeah, you really need 2019, Elias. So yeah, please install that if possible. If you really cannot install 2019 because of permissions or anything, you can still follow the tutorial with .NET Framework, which is not ideal because Microsoft is moving ahead with .NET Core. .NET Framework is more on maintenance mode or something like that, so it's better to use .NET Core. So 2019, that's the best way. Okay, any other questions? So if there is no other questions, you can now go to your site and install, create the accounts, create the app, and do all of that. You can post your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, just like you see here. And as soon as we are back, or during the break, we're going to try to answer those questions. But we'll try to save those questions when we are back online, so we can answer that live for everyone. So if you have any questions, type it, and as soon as we're back, we're going to review that with you. There is just one more question here. Let me review that. Can Great app without BIM 360 admin account? A grant, I believe, right? Rashid, to come to the account admin, you need to be an account admin. So that's the only way, right? You need to be the account admin for that account. If you don't have access to it or cannot ask the account admin to do it, you can ask if you can ask the account admin to do it for you, you can ask him to come to this page, select the tool, click next, and instead of saying I'm a developer, you click invite a developer. So the account admin will type your email here, and you are going to receive I don't know, gmail.com, right? So you are going to receive an invite from the account admin to add you here, right? So that will work as well. I would say that if the BIM 360 account that you have is something that is running in production, right? Your colleagues are using that account. I would say that the account admin will not allow that because you are using the APIs to test that. So it can be unsafe, right? If you don't know what you're doing. For today's training, we're not going to write anything, but it can be unsafe, right? If you're going to write anything. So the alternative is to create a testing account for you, a trial account on BIM 360. That can also work, but that may take some time for you to sign up for a beta, or sorry, a trial. So I would say that for today, use the A360 approach. That's the easiest way for you to complete that in time. But in the meantime, you can either ask the account admin or create a trial account for your testing and development. Hope that answers your question. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we will be back at 10 a.m. in approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes from now. You have plenty of time to install, create your accounts, get everything ready, and see you soon. Welcome to this session 2 of today's training. Now it's about basic server and authentication piece. And I see there was a question about the callback URL. So that's where we are going to use it right now. So let's see how it works. So before I move forward, any questions remaining, you can use the Q&A, you can use the chat, or you can also raise your hand using the participants chat, the options. So I can open your microphone and give you time to ask your question if you have anything. Moving forward, so what are we doing now? We are creating our project on Visual Studio, and we are setting up the environment variables, creating a basic server, and the authentication OAuth controller. That's what we are doing at this piece. So let's see how we do it. Okay, so everything we need is actually on the Learn Forge tutorial. So let me move this to the side and leave Visual Studio here on the right. And we are following the View BIM 360 Fusion modules right here. And we are going to, at this step, we are going to complete the Create a Server and Authorize pieces. You can navigate from the left menu, or at the bottom of each step, you can see a link to the next step. So we're now on Create a Server. We always have to select the language we are using, .NET Core. And what we're going to do is to create a new project right here. So let me move this away. File, new project. And we are selecting ASP.NET Core Web Application right here. And click Next. That's the name of the application. So it's important to use the name that is suggested here, because pieces of the sample may reuse this. So just because I did this training yesterday and it's quite similar, I think I have that folder, that project already on my list of projects. So let me come here and I'm going to delete this one because that's from yesterday. Okay, so that should do it. So I'm just reusing the name that is in here. So it's important to use. Remember that C# is case sensitive, so it's the uppercase on S is important. So let's click Create. Now it asks me to select the version and the type of project. I'm going to select .NET Core 3.1 empty. And as we are running this on localhost, I'm going to disable the HTTPS. I don't need that for now, just to simplify the steps later. So just give it a few moments for Visual Studio to create the project. Our next step is to add the references that we need. So Autodesk Forge and NewtonSoft JSON. So the Autodesk Forge reference helps us access Forge services. So let me go to my Solution Explorer, right click on my project name, and go to Manage NuGet Packages. And let me move this away, go to Browse and Autodesk Forge, and click on it and install. So it's telling me that it needs 2 additional references. So let's hit OK. That's what I need. And that should be it. Next one is to select the NewtonSoft JSON. Again, copy and paste here. And that's the one I need. Note that as Microsoft released version 5 of the .NET Core framework, there is a 5 here as well, but we are going to the 3.1, which is compatible with the version that we're using here. So let's hit install. It's going to use a few additional packages, so just hit OK and accept. And those are the packages that we need. So this image here is showing all of those steps. Next, we are going to add the environment variables that we need for our project. Yeah, don't worry about this. Let me close this as well. Oh, cancel and save. Okay. So to add the environment variables, expand the Solution Explorer again, right click on the project name and go to Properties. And we go to Debug. and those are the environment variables. We have one here, ASP.NET Core environment. We're going to add the core URLs. Let me paste this and use this value. So we are using 3000 just as a way to make it the same on all of our samples. You can use a different port, it's really up to you, but we use this on all of our samples, so it's easier for you if you follow the same standard that we do. Forge client ID and paste. Now I need my client ID, so let's go back to the Forge website, and that's my application. Let's get the client ID and paste in here. Let's go back to the tutorial. The next one is the Forge client secret. Let's copy and add here as well. And my client secret. If I double click here, it's going to copy that for me. So let's come back and paste here and paste. Last is the callback URL, and that is used when we do the authentication. So after the user types in his ID and password, it will redirect to this page. So the value that I have here on the Forge documentation is the exact same value that I have here when I create the app, and is the exact same one that I'm going to use on my environment variable. So they all need to match. Actually what I'm using here on my code and what I have on the dev portal should match exactly to the last letter. Last, let's change the port to 3000 and make sure that the SSL is disabled. We don't need that. And we can leave this launch browser on just to help us debug and test our application. Alright, so let's hit save. Go back to the tutorial. Now you can move to the next one, and we just check this here, they're all good. Now go to the startup.cs and add this missing namespace. So let's copy, go to the startup.cs and add this namespace. And now we are replacing the content of the startup class. So let me copy this and replace with this content here and paste. So what we're doing is we're saying that we want to have endpoint on our application, and we are enforcing the version 3 of the .NET framework, and we are adding Newtonsoft support, and we are telling the system, telling our code that we want to support the default file index.html, and we want to support static files, HTML, JavaScript, CSS files, and we're using this MVC, which means that we have API and client disconnected, and this is just the default support on .NET framework. We have to tell this to the system because in some cases we only have APIs, we don't have front-end code, so that's why we are adding all of those options. Last, we're going to create a controllers folder where we're going to add all of the classes that we are going to execute, that are going to execute the Forge functions. So let's go to the Solution Explorer, right-click on our project, and add a new folder that we are calling controllers. Again, this is just a standard in .NET Core. Now we can go to the authorize piece. Here we are going to implement the three-legged workflow, which is when our application is asking the user to type in his password. We're going to select .NET Core, and we are going to create this OAuth controller with this content in here. So let's create the class and review the code after. So right-click on the folder, go to add new controller. We are going to select API controller empty and hit add. And the name is as described in the doc in the tutorial OAuth. keyboard is not helping me today. Okay, add. And the controller comes with this empty default template class that we are going to delete and add our own. Come on, Visual Studio. Okay, so that's the empty controller. Let's get rid of this, we don't need it, and replace with our own. So let's see what we have here. So first we have how the process works, right? So our browser will call this endpoint to get the URL. That's the OAuth URL. It contains the client ID and the callback URL and the scope that we want. The browser will redirect the user to this page and where the user can type in his password. Once they finish typing the password, it will call me back on the callback endpoint right here. I'm just doing some basic checking if I have the code. With the code, we are going to use the code to get a new access token and add that to the cookies so we can refresh that later. So if we go to this code and go to definition here, it's using the code to get a credential with the full scope, read and write. And right after, we call it again to get a second access token with only viewables read scope. Remember that it's important that you have to first call the one with the higher permission and then the one with lower permission, right? In this case, just read. The one for read is the one we are sending to the browser, so the browser can actually view the modules. The browser can show the modules to the user. And I'm adding all of that information to the cookies here, to the credential, which is then added to the cookies. It contains the internal and public and refresh token. So you may ask you may consider that in this case we are adding all of that information to the cookies, and the cookies are actually sent to the client. That's true, but note that the cookies are encrypted with the connection, so the cookies are not exposed. But the user have access to the internal, but he can only change his own data. So there is no leakage of data, but it's not ideal, right? So the ideal way would be to have this information on a database. But for the purpose of this sample, we are not storing that information on a database because that will complicate a lot the tutorial. So moving forward, ideally you should have this on a database instead. Okay, so that's essentially what's going on here. The only remaining piece is the sign out, which is essentially just cleaning up the cookies and removing everything that we know that this application knows about the user. And last, this endpoint here is returning the credentials to the browser, so the browser can show the module. You'll notice here that we are only providing the public token. That's what's shared with the user. Okay, so let's save. So that's what we are planning to do on this step, code-wise. So let's see how this works. So just to confirm that everything is working. So we can try to get this callback URL here and see if that will work. So let me copy this and hit run. As soon as I press the play here to run, it will compile my code, and as I asked, it's going to launch the browser. It's trying to open the localhost 3000, but there is nothing there, so it's not going to show anything. But what I want to do is to view my my endpoint right here. So this endpoint returns me the URL. So you see that's the URL that I need to redirect the user. So later my code will redirect the user to this endpoint, but we can quickly try if this is working by copying this and doing a manual redirect, right? So let's get rid of this and paste here, and let's hit enter. So that's essentially what will happen. The user that is coming to the application will say, okay, do you want to authorize this Forge training day Forge Training Day 2 application to access your data. And this application is requesting access to write, manage, and view your data. And you can say allow or not. So that's essentially how it will work later. As soon as as soon as we hit allow, it's going to call back. And if we come back here to our code and add a breakpoint right here, we can see the callback happening. So let's click allow, and you see that's the callback with the code right here. That's the code. Then if I run this, you see that the credentials now contain the expiration time, the public token, the internal token, and the refresh token. So note that the token expires today in 1 hour. Yeah, look at my clock here, 11:16, 10:16. After that, I need to use the refresh token to get a new access token. So this code is aware of that, and every time that we try to, let me move up here, every time that we try to get the access token, it will check here. If I try to get the token, let's go to the definition and create from session. Where is it? Right here. Every time that we try to access or get the access token, we are going to check if the expiration is it's passed. In that case, we use the token to do a refresh. So that's the code for refresh. So after 11:16 today on my time, the time of this machine, it will run this code for refresh. Let's go to see there. And it's essentially just calling the same endpoints again, but instead of calling get access token, it's calling the refresh token. And again, I had to first call the higher scope, read write, and then the one with lower scope, just read. So essentially it's doing the same thing we did at the first time, but instead of doing, for the first, is calling the refresh. And you can do the refresh as many times as you need. Just remember that the refresh token is valid for 14 days. So you have to run this refresh token at least once every 2 weeks. But if your code is running this, your user is coming here every 2 weeks, they don't need to sign in again, because the code will just understand that and refresh the access token. Okay, so we finished this authentication piece. There is no UI yet, so that's why it's saying page not found. We haven't done anything, so that's what we're doing on the next steps after here. All right, let me stop my execution and go back here. So now it's your turn to create a project, set up the environment variables, create the basic server, create authentication as we did here, and you can quickly test that as described as we just showed before. And any questions? So I'll leave you to complete those steps. We'll be back in again 1 hour and 40 minutes. Midday Pacific time, to complete how we list hubs, projects, and the user information. Remember that you can always follow the tutorial online. If you wanna keep moving forward and complete the other steps, you can do it as well and ask questions during the process. We'll be here. You can post your questions on the Q&A. You can use the chat, or as soon as we're back, you can also raise your hand and show and talk. And if you have any trouble, let us know. We'll be back in 1 hour and 40 minutes. Oh, there is one question here. Let me take a look at this one. The connector with BIM 360 will be the same for Autodesk Construction Cloud. That's from Rafael Silva. Yes, so it's always good to, in this case, to look at the documentation. So forge.autodesk.com if you are unsure. But I'm telling you, the data management API is the same. So in this case, we are using the data management to list hubs and projects. So if we go to the data management, that's what we're using. Go to API reference and click on the get hubs. So that's the first one we're calling, right? So it says here, Autodesk Construction Cloud and some other things, but note that this endpoint is compatible with ACC projects. So what we're doing here today, is compatible with BIM 360, ACC, and Fusion Teams and A360. So it's across all of the APIs, all of the hosts, the options we have to host your data. Thank you for your question. Okay, so take your time, complete those steps, and we talk in 1 hour and 40 minutes. Thank you. Talk to you soon. Okay, so let's start with the session 3 of the training. This is about listing hubs, projects, and user information. I saw that we have a few questions. One of the questions, actually, it's about the template type on Visual Studio. So I was just checking here on the Microsoft website. It seems that they did change something. They always do. They always change the updates on Visual Studio. That's why. And when you come here to File, New Project, you may not see this ASP Core Web Application. It turns out that if you click here on this install more tools and features, I believe you can enable some additional templates, and I would like to try that, but I'm really sorry about that. As soon as I try, it asks me to update Visual Studio, and if I do this now, it will stop me from presenting today, so I'll do this later. And I think there's one person specifically, Elias, having some trouble. So Elias, let's stay after we finish here. Let's stay and see if we can help you fix your get your Visual Studio to run with that template. But I believe that you can use the .NET Core Basic and do that do that with a basic template and just create the files. So let's review that later, and yeah, I'll let Joao help you in parallel as well. Okay, so let me go here to the next step. So what are we doing now? We're now focusing on the data management controller that will list the hubs, projects, and files we have on our account. And we're also checking for the user information, the user controller. So let's see how this piece will work and understand the code we have. Okay, so let me go back to the tutorial. We finished this authorization piece. Let's move to the next one, list hubs and projects. And so this, the data that you have hosted on Autodesk is actually organized into these abstract layers. So we have hubs, and inside hubs we have projects. And inside a project you can have your items and versions. So an item is essentially a file definition, and we have different versions of that file. Of course, we can organize the items or files inside folders, and then the item and the version. So everything is versioned. So the item is the actual definition of the file, but we have several versions. At the bottom line, we have the object storage service that is storing the files that we'll be hosting. So this is where the file actually exists. And we have hub types that you have to look at the hub type to identify if this is a BIM 360 or Core Hub or no personal hub from A360. So let's select .NET Core. And as described here, let's create this data management controller. So let's go back to our solution, right click on the controller and add a new controller, API empty controller, and hit add. and it says data management, and that's the content we will add there. Let's copy this and replace here. So as we can see, this is just the basic piece of the code. It's showing some error messages as described in here. Don't worry, it's just telling us that we are missing the rest of the code. But I would like to show what is happening before we can add the next piece of this code. So this is the only function or the only endpoint that will be exposed here. And remember that we have a tree with all the files and folders. So this function is returning the node of the tree to render at that specific point. So the browser will call this endpoint passing the ID. And if the ID of the hub is hash, it means that we are calling the topmost level of the tree. So in this case, let's return all the hubs. If the ID of the node that is being expanded is different from hash, it means that we are expanding a project, a folder, or an item node on that tree. So we split, so the ID contains the full ID of the current node. So we split that by the forward slash and get the last piece of that URL, which includes the ID of what we're expanding. So we know right now that we are expanding resources, or we're expanding the hubs or projects or folders or items. So if the user clicks to expand the hubs list, let's return all the projects. If they expand the project, let's return the project contents. If he expands the folder, return the folder contents. And if the user expands the items, let's return all the versions for that item. So this is what this code is doing, is just mapping what I'm trying to see and executing the code to return that specific data. So if we go back to the tutorial, and here are all the pieces, right? So get hubs, let's copy this and add right here. Note that we have to add inside the same class. So after the function public get tree nodes, after that we add the rest of the code. So let's go back to the top so we can see what's happening, right? So that's the first one, get hubs. So this will go to the API and get all the hubs and just categorize the hubs based on the type. So we have the proper icon on the UI. This is getting all the projects. Again, categorizing the projects so we have the proper icon on the tree. Then expanding the project contents and the folder contents. And if we scroll down, the item versions. So those are the versions for one specific item. And as we at the end we need to see that on the viewer, we are getting the ID of the version and converting that to base 64 so we can actually show that. And for each version we are showing the version number, and that's the file name created by this specific person. So sorry, this is the date by this user. So I'm just saying version 1 created on this date by this user. So that's what this format is doing here. So that's what we see on the UI. Okay, so that's all we have on this piece. Let's move to the next one, the user information. Again, this is just to return the user name and picture. So we see that on the UI and we know which user we are executing at that point in time. So let's get to the .NET version. That's the user controller. And that is just one endpoint, profile. Using the credentials, we're going to get that information and just return the username, first name and last, and the picture in the profile image on this specific size here. So let's create the user controller and copy this content. Go back to our code, controllers, add controller, API, add user controller. and replace with this. All right, so let's see if we can get this to work. So if you remember the first time we ran our code, still without any UI, we could get some of this to work, right? We said /API URL to get the authentication URL. We just copied this here and executed. That will redirect to the Autodesk Forge website. We are going to click allow. That will come back with the code. That's what we did on the first step. And this is also setting the cookie. So now we have the cookie with the user information. So as the cookie is on the browser level, we can, I believe we can execute this, and that we should use the same cookie. So let's copy this, because the cookie is on the, you see, so that endpoint is working because the browser now have my cookie with my authentication information. This is my name, this is my picture that is hosted somewhere, and the system is just pointing to that. We can also try the data management endpoint. So if we try here, just to see all the hubs that I have. So let's copy this and paste in here. So we can now execute this again using the same authorization cookie. We can get the execution. So it's just missing the hash, right? So I have to add the question mark ID equals, and I learned that yesterday that %29 is the hash, right? URL encode. We learned it again. Here, URL encode hash. %23. Yeah, 23. Thank you, James. Yes. So when I execute this endpoint passing the hash, it's going to return me the list of hubs that I have in this JSON format, right? So I see that I have one hub, and the name of the hub is Augusto Goncalves Gmail, which is my account name. And it's also returning me my personal hub, that the name is just Augusto Goncalves right here. So this is just the two, and I have one more, sorry. And I have a BIM 360 hub, where the name is Autodesk Forge Partner Development. So I'm just checking, okay, this endpoint is working, and it's giving me the 3 endpoints that I have. One personal hub, one enterprise hub from, one hub from A360, one personal hub, and one BIM 360 hub. And I can see all of those 3 hubs because I have that on my account, and I have provisioned my application with BIM 360, and it's returned me the BIM 360 hubs as well. Okay, so this is how it works, how the API is working. What we're doing next, on the next hour, on the next session, is to have the interface to actually organize all of these so you can see it working, right? So right now we're just testing the endpoints to see how they work. Okay, let me come back here. So now it's your turn. Let's give you some time for you to add the data management controller, to add the user controller, and we will review that on the next session and finish with the UI side. Any questions? Okay, so we'll be back at the 2 p.m. session to finish the presentation, to finish the tutorial. And again, if you have any questions, just post on the Q&A, and we'll try to answer that in the meantime, or we get back at 2 p.m. to finish the tutorial. So let me pause this and pause the recording. Okay, so welcome to the session 4. So that's the where we are going to load our models and prepare for viewing. Before we go, is there any question remaining? I saw there was one question on the Q&A about the recording that we are going to push available very soon. Okay, sorry, I had to turn off Roomba. He was starting to clean up the house. So if there's no questions, let's go for this step. So this step about creating the static files of our application. We are going to create the index HTML, the CSS with the styling, and also the JavaScript for the tree and for the viewer, and to review what we did there. Okay, so let's see how that piece will work. So that's where we left on the previous step. We're just trying with the GitHub's endpoint. We saw it working. Let me stop debugging here. And we just finished the tutorial, the user controller tutorial here. Let's see the show on viewer. Select again .NET Core. Now we have to create the wroot folder with 2 subfolders inside that. Go to the Solution Explorer, right click on our project and add a new folder. That will be the www root. You see that as soon as I hit enter, it's going to change the icon because that's a default icon, default folder for .NET Core. So let's click here again and add 2 subfolders, JS and CSS. And the reason we do this is just to organize our files. And again, this is just how we organize most of our samples, so you understand what's going on. Okay, so let's move to the client side. Our tutorial shows how to create the HTML for version 6 and version 7. So because no, version 7 is like almost a year old now, but still some people using the version 6. But if you don't have anything yet, just use v7, that's the best one. So let's copy this and go to our project and right click on the wroot folder, add new item. And here we are selecting the HTML page. Let's rename it to index, which is the full name, and add right here. Okay, so what do we have here? We have the libraries we're using to create our page, Bootstrap, jQuery, just for styling and managing the JavaScript. And here's the important one. We have the JavaScript and CSS for the viewer. You can see here that we're using v7, 7.star, meaning that it's the major version 7 and any minor version. So that's the best way to do when you are developing. When you have your application ready to go to production, is better for you to hard code the version that you want to use. So how do you know which version to use? So if you go to the documentation, and let me resize this for a moment, and go to the documentation, and inside the viewer documentation right here, you can see that on the change history that right now we are on 7.40. So we can, when we go to production, we should change this to 7.40. And also there is a this is the minor 40, but there is also the patch version, which right now is 0 for version 40. So patch is just minor bug fixes inside that. It's not changing anything, but again, you should hard code to the version that you have, because even if there is some issue with the viewer, your code is handling those issues, right? So you know how to treat them. So that's important. That's why it's important to hard code the version here. But as we are still developing, let's leave it with star, and we can come back to this later. So this page will only have the sign in button and the viewer. That's everything that we see here. So let's go back to our tutorial and scroll down to the next one, the CSS, just styling for our page. So right click, go to the CSS folder and add new item, and that will be a style sheet main.css. Right here. Last we have the forest tree. Let's go to the JS folder and add a new item again. In this case will be a JavaScript file that the name is forest tree. And add and paste right here. So let's see what we have, right? So we have the sign out here on the beginning, but we also have the sign in button here that will call that endpoint to get the URL and just redirect the browser to it. This is where we list the hubs. As you can see, we are just setting up the icons for those hubs, and we are sorting them on a better way. And last, as soon as we click on a hub, it's going to show that model on the viewer. And there is also the show user that will render the name and the icon, the thumbnail, the picture on the screen. Last, we have the Forge viewer. That's the Forge specific piece. Let's add a new item again, JavaScript, and call it Forge viewer, and replace here. So what we're doing here is to launch the viewer with a specific URN and one specific viewable inside that URN. So the viewable piece here, it's because of the plans folder inside BIM 360. Because the plans folder is not showing documents, it's actually showing views inside those documents. So we want to replicate that and show the correct view when we open the viewer. And also there is a statement here, a if statement, to check if the model belongs to EMEA or EU, or US, to add the appropriate prefix here, suffix, sorry. And we're just launching the viewer here and getting the access token to see that model. So now we are done with the static pages. Let's click on the Run in Your App for .NET. It's essentially just click on the play and we can see it running. So let's click on it. And that should open the browser on the localhost 3000, which is the address of our page. So let me maximize this. And it should come now. So now we have the sign in. Remember that, let me sign out and go from the beginning, right? Sign out. So when I click on this button, this is going to call my code, get the URL, redirect the user to this URL where I can type in my credentials. So let's say this. And I have my credentials here. It's confirming the scopes that I'm requesting, and I hit allow. And now I can see the hubs, right? So this tree is, it remembers the last time we opened. So that's why it was expanded at the beginning, because I ran this code before and the same address. So it remembers the address and try to expand again. But here I have my BIM 360 projects. I just have 2 projects with my user. If I expand, I can see the folders inside that project. If I go to plans folder, which is a bit unique, I can see the views, not the documents. That's why we have that specific case there. And if we go to project files, we can see all the files inside project files. And if I click on one of my files, I can see the several versions of that file. Again, V1 to V, whatever I have, the date by this user. So I know which user uploaded this file. So let's say I want to see V9, click here. It should open the viewer with that model ready to view. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing on this piece of the tutorial. Any questions here? So now it's your turn to implement this if you haven't done it yet. You should create the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And that should be all that you need for this step. So I think there is a question here. Let me look. So Joseph is asking, is this the saved version or the published version? It's the published version, right? Because you have to publish to BIM 360. But if you look here in this case specifically, I'm not handling, so this model here is not a collaboration model, but it should work the same way. You should see them here. You just have to, that's the published version of that model. And that's a very interesting point, because if you look at the code, I don't think there is any difference, but the type of the element is C4R type instead of file. Just so you know that this is not a typical file, but something else. But other than that, it should work the same way. So that's one of the beauties of the design automation, the data management API, is that it makes the same thing. It's transparent for you, right? So you don't really have to worry what kind of file you have. The viewer and the data management API will abstract that for you, so you can just see all your files or your folders. You have a URN, just load that URN on the viewer, and the model will show up. So that's the viewer here. If you're trying to download those files from data management, then you have to pay attention to what type you have. Let's say I have a collaboration for Revit or BIM 360 design kind of model, then there is this difference of saved and published. And if you have linked files, that is also a bit different. So you have to worry about if you're trying to download the files and save a local version of that. But yeah, I hope that answered your question, Joseph. Any other questions? So what we will do here is that we will leave this webinar running for a few more minutes if you have any other questions. But that's mostly what we have today, how to create your application. Hope you managed to create your application and it's working well for you. Tomorrow we have one more tutorial. It's about extending the viewer with JavaScript and creating dashboards. And the interesting about tomorrow's training is that you can use either today's code or yesterday's code, right? The same thing we'll do, because it's the same viewer. It doesn't matter where the file is coming from. You can extend the viewer the same way. So you can do tomorrow's training with either way, if yesterday or today's code. The same applies for the dashboard. You can use the same way. My only suggestion is that you have one of those two running already, so you can save time for tomorrow. And you have a model with information on that model that you can actually create a dashboard, right? Don't do like a very basic file like PDF or even DWG. Don't have that much information. It's best to do with Revit or Inventor. That will work best, because there is a lot of data to do a dashboard, right? That will be more interesting. And the training on Friday, it's a bit different. Friday, it's about how to modify models, and that will be used in design automation. So Friday is different from what we did today and yesterday, and we will do tomorrow. But hope to see you Friday too, to learn how to modify your models. And after the training, after this week, if you have any other questions, you can always post your questions on Stack Overflow. We actively monitor Stack Overflow for all the questions with the Autodesk Forge tag. So just use Autodesk Forge or Autodesk Viewer or Model Derivative or Design Automation. Even if you're using BIM 360 specific APIs, just use Autodesk-BIM 360. That should work the same way. We answer all the questions there as well. And I think that's it. Any other questions? I don't see anything yet. Okay, so thank you for attending today. Hope you enjoyed the training. As I said, I'll leave this webinar open for a few more minutes if you have any other questions. There is one here. Are you going to provide the final data set? Final data set, what do you mean, Elias? Data set, you mean the code? Okay, so the code, come back here. So the code is actually available on the tutorial. So if you go back to the tutorial and expand, if you go back to the tutorial and go to the beginning of the tutorial, which is right here, you can see the steps we did today and you can see the code. So we did .NET Core. So if you click here, you can see the source code on Git. That's everything we did. You can just download a copy. Download as a zip or open, or it's everything is public on GitHub. So you can just download a copy of the source code. So that's valid for today and also valid for yesterday. So if you go back on yesterday's training here, you can see all the languages you have. You can choose .NET Core and download the source code. Thank you for your question. Good point. The source code is available there. There is one more from James. If you're using a TokenFlex enterprise account at our company, how many tokens does Forge use up per user? So Forge is not using the tokens per user. Forge may be using tokens or cloud credits when you do one of the paid APIs, right? So it's very important. So if you do something like what we did today to view BIM 360 modules, this is not consuming additional credits or additional tokens because the API is just connecting to BIM 360 and retrieving metadata and geometry and showing that on the viewer. Now, if you do the training we did yesterday, where we translate the models right here, where we call it view your models, for this sample, you have to post a job for translation. So in this case, when you post that job for translation, there is a cost involved that, depending on what kind of contract you have, is going to deduct from those cloud credits. So that's just to make the difference between yesterday and today. But to get more information about the cloud credits and how much it costs, go to forge.autodesk.com and then pricing. So here there is an explanation about pricing, and you can find details on what's the cost and how much will be for you. And if you have some sort of different kind of agreement, you can always send a message to the team that they will contact you. You can reach the team here, and they contact you to understand more about what kind of contract you have, to explain how that we deduct from your account. But essentially, this is the cost involved when you do the translation yourself. But for today, there is no cost. One more from Elias. Can Forge be used to manage TokenFlex account? Actually, yes. You can use Forge for TokenFlex API. If you go to the documentation and scroll all the way here, you can see TokenFlex. There is an API for it. So you can do something. I don't know exactly what you want to do, but I would suggest to take a look at the endpoints that you have available, or check the tutorial how to query and export usage information. So there is some tutorial here step by step on how to use those APIs, but TokenFlex will not be covered this week just because of the time, right? But there is some documentation available as well. Thank you, Elias. Any other questions? Oh, I think there is one more. So Rashid is asking, what is the pricing for Autodesk Enterprise Business Agreement? Well, the price for Forge is the same, but depending on what kind of EBA, Enterprise Business Agreement, you have, the actual cost in dollars can be different, right? Because of whatever you discussed with sales. So, but if you look at pricing, it's the same thing. So if you have a specific request or a specific question about your specific agreement, please reach the sales representative that made your contract. They will help you clarify that. But in regards to Forge, the cloud credit consumption is always the same. So you may have different types of cloud credits, but essentially they consume as described in here. Okay, thank you to Elias. Thank you for joining today. What else? This is thank you, Ashin. Okay, thank you for attending today. Thank you for your time. It was very good to have you here. And I think that's it. Thank you and see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have one more training. We pause this. Stop recording.